Let's make Africa the tree of life. Let's make Africa the tree of life.
Hello, welcome to Josh Moment. If you are new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like and share this video. So, in today's episode, we'll be looking at the evolution of the African Union. So, let's start today's episode. So, the African Union, or the AU, is a continental body consisting of the 55 member states that make up the countries of the African continent. It was officially launched in 2002 as a successor to the Organization of African Unity, which was formed in 1963. So let's look at the background to how the Organization of African Unity became the African Union. So on May 1963, 32 heads of independent African states met in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to sign the charter, creating Africa's first post-independent continental institution, the Organization of African Unity. The OAU was the manifestation of the Pan-African vision for an Africa that was united, free and in control of its own destiny, and this was entrenched in the OAU Charter, in which the founding fathers recognized that freedom, equality, justice, and dignity were essential objectives for the achievement of the legitimate aspiration of the African people and to foster cooperation among African states in response to the aspiration of African brotherhood and solidarity, and in the long run, unity that transcends ethnic and national differences. So the guiding philosophy was that of Pan-Africanism, which centered on African socialism and promoted African unity, the communal characteristics and practice of African community, and a drive to embrace Africa's culture and common heritage. So let's look at the objectives of the Organization of African Unity. So the objectives of the OAU were to rid the continent of the remaining vestiges of colonialism and apartheid, to promote unity and solidarity among African states, to coordinate and intensify cooperation for development, to safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states, and to promote international cooperation. So on September 9th, 1999, the heads of state and government of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, issued the Seti Declaration calling for the establishment of an African Union, with a view of accelerating the process of integration on the continent and to enable Africa to play its rightful role in global economy, whilst addressing multifaceted social, economic, political problems compounded as they were certain negative aspects of globalization. So the Constitutive Act of the African Union and the Protocol on Amendment of the Constitutive Act of the African Union lay out the aims of the AU, otherwise the African Union. So let's look at these aims. So one, to achieve greater unity and solidarity between African countries and their people. To defend the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of its member states. To accelerate the political and socio-economic integration of the continent. To promote and defend Africa's common position on issues of interest to the continent and its people. To encourage international cooperation. To promote peace, security, stability, and cooperation on the continent. To promote democratic principles and institutions, popular participation, and good governance. To promote and protect human and people's rights in accordance with African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other relevant human rights instruments. To establish the necessary conditions which enable the continent to play its rightful role in global economy and in international negotiations. To promote sustainable development at the economic, social, and cultural levels, as well as integration of the African economies. To promote cooperation in all fields of human activity in order to raise the living standard of African people. To coordinate and harmonize the policies between the existing and future regional economic communities for the gradual attainment of the objectives of the Union. to advance the development of the continent by promoting research in all fields, particularly in science and technology, to work with relevant international partners in the eradication of preventable diseases and the promotion of good health on the continent, to ensure the effective participation of women in decision-making, particularly in political, economic, and socio-cultural areas, to develop and promote common policies on trade, defense, and foreign relations to ensure the defense of the continent and the strengthening of its negotiation positions, to invite and encourage the full participation of the African diaspora, an important part of our continent in the building of the African Union. So let's look at how the AU's work is being carried out, or how these objectives we've spoken about be able to carry out. So let's look at how the AU works. So the work of the African Union is implemented through several principal decision-making organs. So let's look at these principal decision-making organs. One, we have the Assembly of Heads of State and Government. We have the Executive Council. We have the Permanent Representative Committee. We have the Specialized Technical Committee. We have the Peace and Security Council. And lastly, we have the African Union Commission. There are other organs through which the AU carries out its activities. So let's look at some of these organs. So the African Union structure promotes participation of African citizens and civil society through the Pan-African Parliament and the Economic, Social, and Cultural Councils, also known as the ECOSOC. Organs that handle judicial and legal matters as well as human rights issues include the following: the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and then the African Court on Human and People's Rights. Don't forget, one is Commission and one is Court. The African Union Commission on International Law, the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The other organs also, such as the African Union is also working towards the establishment of a continental financial institution, the African Central Bank, the African Investment Bank, and the African Monetary Fund. So the regional economic communities and the African peer review mechanism are also key bodies that constitute the structure of the African Union. So to ensure the realization of its objectives and attainment of the Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, Agenda 2063 was developed as a strategic framework for Africa's long-term socio-economic and integrative transformation. So Agenda 2063 calls for a greater collaboration and support for African-led initiatives to ensure the achievement of the aspirations of the African people. So let's look at departments within the African Union. So one, we have the agriculture, rural development, blue economy, and sustainable environment. We also have the economic development, tourism, trade, industry, and mining. There's also education, science, technology, and innovation. There's also infrastructure and energy. There's also political affairs, peace, and security, also known as PAPS. There's also health, humanitarian affairs, and social development. We also have women, gender, and youth. We have civil society and the diaspora. We also have the legal affairs. So one will ask, with all these, what has the African Union been able to achieve? Well, so let's look at some of the achievements of the African Union. So with this, we'll be looking at two of the achievements, and then we'll look at some of the problems associated with it thereof. So the let's start with achievements. So African countries have an institutional platform to engage other global agencies, financial institutions, and external actors. That is one of the achievements. And then the second one, progress has also been made towards operationalizing the African standby forces, the command and control forces, force allocation, Deployment scenarios and logistics plans are in place and regularly exercised up to the bridge level. This was a long-held dream of the founders of the AU's predecessor, the Organization of African Unity. So let's look at the challenges, since the challenges are more than the achievement. So the challenges ahead are enormous. Contrary to the vision articulated in its constitutive act, the AU's legislative, judicial, and technical organs remain weak, especially relative to the Assembly of Heads of State and Government, which comprises the leaders of its 55 member states, the Pan-African Parliament, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, designed to give civil society organizations a voice within the AU institution, remain consultative body with no power. The African Court on Human and People's Rights, established to protect human rights and reduce impunity at the national level, remains handicapped. Only 32 countries have ratified its protocol, and out of these, just 8 accept its jurisdiction to hear complaints from citizens. Moreover, it is not permitted to sanction or investigate an incumbent president. So the lack of political will to empower these regional institutions also weakens the commitment to common norms. Under the 2000 Lomé Declaration, the AU established a protocol for condemning coups and expelling offending members. This rule has been implemented in Egypt in 2013, Burkina Faso in 2015 and 2022, Guinea in 2021, Mali in 2020 and 2021, and Sudan 2019 and 2022. However, it was silent on others such as Zimbabwe and Chad in 2017 and 2021 respectively. Further, even in the cases where the AU implemented the protocols, the modalities for rehabilitation or comeback are unclear, as most offenders eventually wind up back into the AU with little or no consequences. The AU is also not united over how to deal with the term limit violations. ECOWAS led the way in 2015 by introducing a non-retroactive two-term limit rule for its 15 member states. However, resistance by 2 authoritarian members at the time, Togo and Gambia, caused it to stall. Though the issue remains on the ECOWAS agenda, ECOWAS sent troops to remove Gambia's Yahya Jammeh, who refused to step down after losing an election in 2017. However, 2 years later, ECOWAS failed to stop Faure Gnassingbé from bypassing Togo's constitution to hand himself a third term amidst a wave of deadly violence. So the Gnassingbé family has ruled Togo as a hereditary dynasty since 1975. So another challenge of the African Union, widespread frustration over such inconsistencies have led some Africans to dismiss the African Union as a president's club. In the mode of its predecessor, the Organization of African Unity, which faced similar criticism even from founding fathers like Tanzanian President Julius Nyerere. Some say the African Union should be disbanded as it is perennially cash-strapped and bites off more than it can chew. The AU is highly fragmented with too many focus areas. Its complicated structure and limited managerial capacity makes it inefficient and unaccountable. There's a poor coordination between the AU and various regional economic communities. However, others say the African Union is being unfairly judged against impossible ideals, as it is ultimately an organization of member states who must commit themselves to these norms. For many Africans, the viable pathway for the African Union is the judicious implementation of the letter and spirit of founding documents and additional protocols, particularly those relating to the bodies designated to facilitate citizen input. The Pan-African Parliament is a good place to start. Only when the AU becomes truly Pan-Africanist, people-centered and democratic, will African citizens feel they can readily support and defend the African Union's decision, even and also own its challenges. I don't think this is how we want to see the AU become, considering its vision and intentions for which it was created. Anyway, we'll end today's episode here. So if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like and share this video. And before we go, don't forget, one day our lives will become history. What will posterity say about you? See you in the next episode.